because it's the first meeting that I invited the teachers I'm working with in Colombia, the ones that are part of my research project. So it's the first time, I will say that this is the first time that we are talking about bilingualism in normal schools, in an international setting, which is very important because for years, normal schools have been, left behind in the bilingual policy, and they're just being invisible in terms of the practice that they do in those institutions. So that's why I just wanted to say that. And for the ones that maybe are online and maybe don't know what Fulbright is a community, is an association, and is one of the largest communities around the world. In my case, I applied through the research student, but there are many programs that you can maybe check and revise. So you can go to another country, or you can receive students from all parts of the world. So there is a partnership with more than 140 countries around the world. So just for the ones that are conducting a master program or are in the undergraduate program, you can go and check this website, and you can check which country would you like to go, and maybe see which kind of programs you can apply. So even if you want to go to my university or any other university, you can check the possibilities to apply. The conditions are different. Like in my case, I have to apply and submit a large amount of documents. And I went through almost 1 year of application that consisted of submitting essays, making some interviews. There were a lot of steps in the process. So, but that was specifically for my program, and maybe for yours could be different. So it's just an idea if you want to check, especially for the ones maybe that are now in Colombia. If you want to come to the university, there is a possibility that you should consider. Even if you want to be a teacher, you can come here, obviously not to teach English, but to teach Spanish in a university. So that is a possibility that you can do with Fulbright. And for the ones who are in Colombia, you can just check Fulbright Colombia, and there are all the possibilities where you can submit your application. So just moving and enter into the topic, the objectives for today are, first of all, provide an overview of the linguistic policy in Colombia. This is going to give you a context of where my research work is being carried out. I want you to get familiarized with the teacher education in normal schools. So probably if you don't have the idea of what a normal school is, because it was an idea from the past, and in the university there are no more schools, you will get to know how do they operate in countries as, for example, Colombia. And finally, I want to share the possible outcomes of the visit to FAU, and I want to make connections. I want to connect teachers from here and maybe a student from here to students in Colombia that are right now connected to this meeting. So to reach those goals, I want to follow the following agenda. So first, I will talk about the linguistic and cultural diversity in Colombia to provide you a context. And from that, I will just focus on the language policy that will give you the framework or the context of my research, which has to do with preserving English as a second language teacher training in the context of normal schools. After that, I will talk and explain and expand a little bit more about the proposal that we have together with Dr. Ramirez, where we have been working for this month. And finally, I will have a time for questions, reflections, or comments, or any other thing that maybe you consider is proper. So we will start for the first point in the agenda. And I want to ask you, and also the ones who are there online, have you ever been in Colombia? Could you please raise your hand? And you just told me he knows a lot. He has been to Barranquilla, to Medellin.
He has been everywhere.
Yeah, I know. What about you, the ones that are online? Could you please type, have you ever been in Colombia? And the ones who are in Colombia, could you please tell me where you are? Para los que están en Colombia, me pueden escribir desde donde nos acompañan, please. Joe Hernández dice que sí, Joe, you have the hand. No, I have not yet. You should go to Colombia. I don't know if you have time to see the pictures at the beginning of the presentation. So there were many pictures of the Colombian landscape. So, okay, so this is just because I want to know, more about the context in our country. So we have the Pacific, the Atlantic Ocean by this side, and there our limits are with Venezuela, Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru. Comparing to the United States, we are a very tiny, small country. And just to give you an idea of how big we are, I think in extension, we are kind of the same. We are as big as Texas, I will say so, more or less, in terms of extension, but not in population. So as you can see, we are very small. We have a very small country, but it is very diverse in linguistic and cultural terms. So we have our official language is Spanish. We have 90 ethnic groups, which are divided into indigenous, racial, which is Afro-Caribbean groups, Afro-Colombians, and the Romani. As you can see, that is the minority, considering that our population is more than 51 million people. So they are the minority in our country. Besides that, we have 65 indigenous languages, we have Spanish as the official language, but the indigenous languages are co-official languages in their territories. So there are 15 linguistic families. We have also 2 Creole languages. And one of those Creole languages is spoken in these islands that is over here, which is San Andres and Providencia. And those languages is a mix between French, English, Spanish, and they have their own phonetics. That is one. And the other one is spoken in Bolivar, which is north coast of Colombia. And it has a lot of African influence. We have also a Romani language, a native sign language. And as you will see here, Spanish, although we have all this variety of languages and ethnic groups, Spanish is the language that is dominant in our country. So from that, we have established that those groups are the minorities, minoritized in our country. And because of that, there are some practices that is still affecting those groups, even though our conquest was a long time ago. So specifically for those minoritized groups, they have some difficulties accessing basic services such as health, water, education. They have been victims of armed conflict and illicit crops. And there have been some infrastructure projects that have been developed without consultation of those communities. All that conditions have made those groups to move, or they have been forced to move to hegemonic societies. And then they will have to feed, they feel the necessity to feed in those hegemonic societies. And the last point, which is what I'm going to focus today, is that the bilingual policy is centered in dominant languages, as you will see here. So this is our timeline of the bilingual policy, and only the red ones are the ones that are centered in those indigenous languages, so just 2. And the rest of them are centered in foreign languages. So those are the programs and acts, and they are just left behind in the bilingual policy in Colombia. So when it comes to talk about bilingual policy in Colombia, it is centered always in English. And they have established, an outcome from the program is that English is a mandatory subject in elementary, secondary schools, colleges, and university, even though not all the students have the same possibilities to access to the language, to the foreign language. English is assessed in national exams, especially in higher levels. So the strategies in each one of the programs are centered in the higher levels. It means 11th grade, when you want to get your professional degree, you have to demonstrate that you are in a certain kind of level. And even also, if you want to be a teacher, you have to demonstrate that you have certain amount of level. And these levels are following the Common European Framework. I don't know if you are you familiar with the Common European Framework? What about you online? Do you know something about the Common European Framework? Can you say yes, no? Just send me a thumbs up. Yes. Andrea Gutierrez say yes, Ellen yes, okay. So just, I'm not going to go in detail, like which is each one of the levels, but I just want to say that A level is related to a very basic level of English. Just introduce yourself, say your name, your favorite color, your favorite food, things like that. B2 level is a independent level. That is, B2 level is the level that is asked if you want to study here in the United States, for example. So it is kind of an independent level. And C1 level is an academic level. Okay, so that is the level that maybe Dr. Ramirez has, is a higher level of English. In Colombia, it is established that at the end of these grades, you should be in this level. So if you are in 3rd grade, you should be in A1. And if you want to be a professional, you have to certificate that you are in a B2 level. But the point is that, as I will show you later, that not all the students have the access to learn the language. That is the point. And behind that, there is a language ideology that has to do with the idea of the correct English, of the good English. The idea there is one standardized English, and the teaching practices are always, I wouldn't say always, but they have that method or that focus that there is a separation of languages. So language is not the mean to learn content, but just to learn the language, grammar rules, structure, and everything, separated from the context of each one of the students. And one of the things that I want to remark here is that behind that there is also an ideology that has to do with the identity of the teachers. So we as English teachers, we don't say, hey, I'm an English teacher. Some of them say, hey, I'm a B1 level, I'm a B2 level, or maybe between the schools. This school is a B1 level, this other school is a B2 level, and behind that B and B2, BC1, there is an identity that is related to the position and prestige. That is how it works in Colombia. So as a consequence, there is just an instrumental view of the language. English is attached to better job opportunities, higher income and social status. As I mentioned before, even though there are those levels, there are not the same conditions for students from public schools or private schools. For example, in my case, I'm a teacher in a public school, and my students in secondary, they just have 2 hours of English per week, while in a private school, they have 6 hours or more hours of English per week. What is more, in public schools, even though English is a mandatory subject, there are no teachers of English in elementary levels. So it is the elementary teacher who, in most of the cases, doesn't have enough preparation for teaching English, the one who must teach English to those kids. That is the center of my research, so I will explain to you later. And as you can see here, so there are just minimum amount of teachers teaching English in elementary levels, and that is related to the fact that standardized tests are applied in higher levels. So all the strategies are directed to higher levels of teaching. So here there are some numbers. So there is the amount of teachers that are in total between those years, English language teachers working for official schools. And as you can see, most of them were for secondary levels, and just 2,079 of them were for elementary and preschool. Considering that in Colombia, there are more than 13,000 official schools. So just 279 teachers for 13,000 schools. And what is more, most of those English language teachers were for urban schools. So there is also a big gap between rural and urban contexts. So this is just the overview and the introduction for my research. That is the context where my research is being carried out. And I'm working specifically with a group of teachers that are trained in normal schools. Those teachers teach all subjects, including English. So that is the context of my research. So, but before continuing, I want to know have you ever heard about normal schools? Do you know anything about normal schools, or in French, école normale? Yeah, what do you know about normal schools?
Well, these are rooted in teacher preparation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Have you ever heard about normal schools?
Yeah, it was started in this country by Horace Mann in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And so the teachers would take training in the morning, instruction in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the afternoon, they would apply that instruction to children.
That's correct.
And that was that particular model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. What about the ones who are online? I first heard of them in American history. Okay. Is there anyone else online that knows something about normal schools? Okay, yeah. So basically, normal schools were created in France, and it was an institution where teachers got that training to teach in elementary levels. So I want to remark here this fact, because this is what is still being doing in Colombia. So those are institutions where future preschool and elementary teachers are trained to teach in those levels. So in the United States, the first private normal school was created in 1823. Then in the 30s, the normal school became colleges. And after that, they became academic departments of college of education. That is kind of the same timeline that was followed in South America, especially in countries as Brazil, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. So most of them closed by the 70s, but they have kind of the same process. In Colombia, it didn't happen. We still have normal schools, and they operate as a regular school, as I will show you in the next slide. So in Colombia, if you want to be a teacher, you can go either to a university or to a normal school for 2 years or 2 years and a half. And a normal school in Colombia is just a regular school that offers the service from preschool to upper secondary or high school, plus the 2 years of training of teachers. So basically in the same building, there are teachers being trained and there are kids around, which is really nice because it's basically like a laboratory of teachers. So this is just some characteristics of normal schools in Colombia. Their teaching practice, or the pedagogical teaching practice, starts from the very beginning, from the first semester, and it is not only observing, but also doing the class in all subjects. The other fact is that they have to conduct a research project from the beginning, and that is in most of the times action research. And that is something that I want to highlight here, because although they do a lot of research in those levels, in elementary and preschool, the papers that they produce are not being visible. They are not in digital platforms. So if you want to check what they have done in terms of research, you have to go to the library and check the papers because there is no like a platform, digital platform. Besides that, they have to study English language methodology because, as I mentioned, English is mandatory from elementary to almost to high school. So they have to study English, but not only English, but also social science, maths, all the subjects, all the directives of the subjects, including, of course, the foreign language. Once they graduate, they can teach in preschool and elementary, and they also can be rural school principals. That's what they can. And I just passed, sorry. And as I already mentioned, they have to teach all subjects, including English. And although they have a lot of strategies to share, they are very innovative and creative. I think there is a deficiency in terms of English in some of the normal schools, not in all of them. So why are normal schools so important in Colombia? In total, we have 137 normal schools. And I would say that most of them are in most of the locations where they are is the only institution to access formal education. As I already mentioned, they conduct research in their communities that haven't been visible. And 69% of teachers graduated from normal school work for rural schools. So I want to show you. And in terms of English, there are not official language or any research that let you know what do they do in terms of English, how they are being trained, how the programs are being structured. There is nothing that gives you an idea of what they are doing in terms of English language methodology. And there are some strategies from the Ministry of Education to enhance the performance of English of those future teachers, but those strategies just consider the 10% of the total of the institutions. So that is another problem. So basically, we don't know what they do. And future teachers from normal school are the ones who implement, negotiate, resist, and adapt bilingual policies in their context. Most of them have to do the practice in other schools, most of them rural schools, where the language policy just don't go there. The state, the government doesn't reach those places because the difficulty accessing to those places. So the future teachers are the ones who must just give them or just teach them the language policy of their in terms of teaching English. So remember this chart that I showed you also at the beginning about the amount of teachers in Colombia, English language teachers, and that most of them teach in urban zones. But the contrary, the teachers that graduate from normal schools, most of them work in rural zones. Most of them work in there, which is the conclusion that we get here is that they are the ones who just bring English to those communities. And this is my research questions. So basically what I want to explore are the principles guiding the English training of pre-service teachers in 5 normal schools in Colombia. They are located in different places around Colombia. So I want to explore what are the beliefs toward TEFL, which is teaching English as a foreign language. And from there, I want to see what do they do in the pedagogical teaching practice, because they have to teach English and they have a lot of knowledge that could be shared in terms of methods and strategies, but that hasn't been visible. And the last point that I want to explore is the pedagogical research practice. I already conducted data collection and I found 47 documents related to research in English that are in the libraries. So I want to make that work visible. So this is my methodology. I work with, as I already mentioned, 5 teacher training colleges or 5 normal schools. those were my data collection instruments. And this is my research design is in Spanish, but the stages are in English. So the first thing that I do was I call it in Spanish, like positioning myself, because it was not only the review of the literature, but also kind of deconstruct the idea that I have toward normal schools, because it is kind of naturalize the idea that normal schools must be as universities, but they are not equally seen the same. So there is the idea, and I have that idea naturalized in my mind. So I have just to see that they are also institutions that have a lot of things to share. So after that, I design all the instruments. I make a pilot in one of the institutions. I collect data through all the instruments that you just saw in the previous slide. And I went to each one of the institutions. And now I'm in the last stage, which is data analysis and writing my doctoral thesis. That is what I'm doing right now. So just to talk about what I'm doing here and how we will enrich, how I will enrich my doctorate research project from my experience here in FAU. First of all, I think one of the most important things that I have gained from this university is the support from Dr. Ramirez, because he has given me a lot of ideas and a lot of knowledge in terms of theoretical framework, methodological methods to just reinforce to strengthen my doctoral thesis. I also want to explore his research, specifically the one that he has been carried out with Reading to Learn. And I want to share my work. I want to make normal schools in Colombia more visible. I want just to let people know what do they do, how important they are for our country. And finally, together with Dr. Ramirez, the idea is to create a set of consideration that could enrich the initial training of teachers in normal schools. And to do so, we are already working on a proposal, which is Reading to Learn for Colombian teachers. So maybe if you are now there from the normal school, and if you are interested on knowing what is this strategy about, you can just text me or contact me and I will give you more information about that. So those are the units that we are creating based on the Colombian context and with a rural focus. Just thinking on the idea that in Colombia, we are talking about new rurality, which has to do with the new idea of the relation between rural and the urban zones. So it is not the idea of progression of the rurality of rural context to the urban zones, but how the rural are self-sufficient in terms of agriculture and other things that they are also good at. So we are considering those this strategy based on those communities and based on the needs of the future teachers in normal schools. So that is what we have done. We have been working on this for the last month since I arrived. So that is what we have been doing so far. And that's it. So I don't know if there are some questions, suggestions. We have plenty of time. I think I just rushed. So I don't know if you have any questions or any comment, maybe the ones who are online. Let me just open this camera.
Maybe since the audience just saw what you did with the rurality, the unit, they might be wondering why is that in English, in Spanish? Like, what does that have to do with English? Maybe you can, maybe you can illustrate that.
Yeah, there is. I think this method has to do with a change of mind in terms of language. So as you see in the previous slides regarding the vision of language that we have in our country is very structural, I would say. It is attached to prestige, and we have seen in Spanish like an enemy in that process of learning another language. With this method, we use Spanish as our principal resource to learn another language. So I think that is the most important part. So we recognize the other as a person who knows a lot, but maybe he knows a lot in his native language, in Spanish. Why don't we use that to learn another language? So basically, the method consists on having some texts in Spanish, prepared with a set of steps, prepare each one of the sentences and words, and go through the text, and then have that do as a input to do the same process in English. So that is basically, so students kind of they become experts in one text in Spanish, and then as they have all the knowledge, they will understand better in English. So it's kind of a cycle, is doing a process in both languages, but using first language as the main resource of knowledge. And in that way, which is very interesting, is that it recognizes that one student is able to learn, and then maybe the restriction is just the language, which is something that we have seen in our policy. So language is sometimes, as you saw in the previous slide, you just say this person is a B1 level or is a A2 level, so they don't know any other subject or any other content. So that is basically the idea that we have from our language policy. But in here is just recognize that the language, the native language, is a resource, and that we have to explore it, and that we have to use it for English classes. Because what happens, and I am just speaking from my experience as a teacher, is that we just see language as something that must be put a part of the classroom in English classes. So if you enter to the classroom, you just forget about the Spanish, but it is a resource in this method. So that is where it's really interesting.
Yuly, do you mind summarizing your research questions and what were your findings?
Yeah,
Because I think that would provide more context.
Yeah, my research question has to do with what are the teachers future teachers in normal schools doing in terms of English language training. English language training is a very big field to explore, but there are like three main things that they consider in that training. So the first one is like all the ideology that they receive in the classes. So how do they do the classes in English methodology? Because they take classes not only in English, but in English language methodology. So I want to explore that. The other thing that is, I would say that is not only in English, but in all subjects, which is very important, is the teaching practice. So what do they do in the teaching practice? How those ideologies are placed in the real context where they have to carry out the class. And the last part, which is like a chain, is what do they do in terms of research? Because not all of them conduct research in English. That is the important part of this. But some of them have done a lot of great work in terms of doing research in English, and especially considering that they work with some population that has been like neglected, I would say, by the language policy, which is the elementary and preschool level. So they are conducting research with this kind of population. So it is like a chain, like starting from the ideologies that they have, how that is seen from the pedagogical practice, and finally, how is that projected in the research project. So those are the three main points of my research. And the main findings, I'm doing that. I have a lot of things to systematize. I'm just transcribing the interviews. So I'm trying to work on that with Dr. Ramirez as well. Yeah.
You mentioned that only 10% of the normal schools receive government assistance and funding. How are the normal schools funded and supported? Is it local? Is it what kind of support do they get in order to operate?
It is more, most of the time I will show here because I just, these are the programs that have been designed to support normal schools. So that is the current one. And it's basically I will say like the company or the coalition with an external institution. So the support that they receive is from the British Council, guiding them to, in that case of this program, to make the normal school bilingual. That is in that case. In these two strategies, it consisted of having some private schools with good level in English, having some kind of coalition with the normal school, so the good school could teach them how to do it in English, how to do it, like to kind of sharing practices between the students with good level of English and the future teachers in normal schools. And this is also carried out by the British Council, but there is nothing found about this program. So I just found the name, but there is not like any information, real information about that one. So
I know a number of years ago that Colombia was a recipient of the largest amount of US aid other than Israel. And so a lot of US support that was going to the government. I'm just curious, is that, number one, is that still exist? And what's the relationship of our governments? And if so, how is that aid? Is any of it coming into these schools?
mm-hmm. Not directly. I think you are talking about Alianza para el Progreso, which it was an alliance, but I'm not sure about the year. So at that time, yes, we received kind of funds, and we still receive kind of funds, but through other organizations. So maybe through the embassy and through the Colombo Americano, which are like the representation of the United States in Colombia. So they gave basically courses for teachers, training courses for teachers. There is also a partnership between Fulbright and teachers from public schools. So they provide the opportunity to come here and study in a university. But apart from that, I don't know any other strategy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of questions in the chat from Dr. Arisa and from Joe.
So Aileen, oh, thank you, Aileen. I'm just reading your comments. So it said, I did a lot of research training in Bucaramanga a very long time ago, and the biggest problem for the teacher was actually being immersed in English. What is being done nowadays to expose teachers to daily English conversation? In Bogota, it depends. It depends on the city where you are, because in Bogota, we have a specific strategy, but those strategies are not for all schools. So if you want to get involved in that kind of strategies, there must be kind of a institutional support. That in one hand, and in the other hand, like you can also have the possibility to access to different programs in universities, but that is more like a personal aim if you want to do so. But there is nothing like mandatory, and there is a really like a very important thing that should be covered, because in Bogota, at least in public schools, we don't have the possibility to practice English. I mean, it's not like you go out and everyone speaks English. No, you have to look for the possibilities, and sometimes the possibilities are given by the government, but it is always in a very hierarchical way. So there is the one who knows a lot English, and it goes to the point again That is someone who knows a lot of English, someone who is expert in English, teach students from public school. So that is basically. So I think that must be changed. So in the term that in the way that we see ourselves in a not in a higher level, but more in a horizontal level, we will learn more because we always receive the knowledge, and the courses don't have any at the end. The courses that doesn't have any. The courses that don't have any purpose. So there is something that must be evaluated. That is another thing, that those courses are not evaluated by the teachers who are the ones who receive the grants. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that. She just asked what is being done nowadays to expose teacher to daily English conversation. Yeah, there are many strategies, but no all of them are continuously offered. When you visited the normal schools in Colombia, what did you observe there that led you to the direction of your research? Well, what do you mean with I observed? I went to observe 9 classes in total. So I went to observe the normal school environment itself, and I went to observe the classes that the featured teachers conduct in English with the little ones. So that was what I observed. And the findings, I'm writing the findings. I will let Yuly know about your question. Yeah, I don't know if you have any other question. Joe is a student. If there is, I will speak in Spanish for a little bit. Y si hay alguien que quiera hacer su pregunta en español, lo puede hacer por el chat también. So we have just a couple of minutes more. And especially for the ones who are online, I want you to give me your suggestions, comments, reflections, or maybe if there is something that you consider that I must consider in my research, especially in the consideration, I will be more than glad to receive it. So this is a QR code. It is also shared by the chat, the meeting chat. So I will be really glad to receive your comments and any outcomes from this presentation.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
So in your review of literature
Mhm.
and your conceptual framework, I've just started reading on decoloniality, beginning all the way back to Frantz Fanon and others. But today, a lot of people are looking at language policy and resisting the
Yeah.
hegemony and definitely resisting the British Council. And that literature is growing. So I wonder to what extent are you looking at coloniality, post-coloniality, decolonizing,
Yeah.
that whole emerging literature today? Are you?
Like I didn't consider it for my theoretical framework, but I read it. But now I'm more conscious about the importance of having that in my considerations, because as I told you, like the first stage in my design was to establish my position, and that position was deconstructed through all the phases in the methodological design. So I started like looking more in detail to decoloniality and all the topics related to that when I started going to the normal schools. So there is something that I have to explore more for the consideration. So if you have any other that you consider I can read to expand that, I will be glad to.
Sure.
To hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I have introduced Yuly to the work of Philipson. I don't remember his first name. Linguistic Imperialism, 1992. A very, very important work on that. And in fact, a lot of that decoloniality around languages has built on Philipson. And now she's looking at that for sure. One of the things that I was very impressed with with Julie's research, and that she's too humble to actually kind of like consider or say, is that her research is kind of an argument. It's an argument, a funds of knowledge argument. It's like normal schools are really important, and we should look to them to learn. The universities should actually would learn from them if you really look closely. So she's now looking to the possibility of including the idea of organic intellectuals from Gramsci, that are
Right.
coming from the ground, and looking at that with that perspective. So that might create that more theoretical.
So just the word normal school, it
Yeah.
will give the low status.
Mhm.
So many years ago, I took a master's in teaching English as a second language at an elite school, elite university,
Uh-huh.
Columbia University, Teachers College. There were no classes. From day one, you went and you were teaching and you were observed by all the professors. But because it was Columbia, there was no mention of normal school. It was the method that the professors at Columbia were bringing to English language learning. I have no idea, this was in the 70s, so I have no idea what Teachers College is doing today. But they probably have great archives
Mhm.
of how they took on the ground practices and turned them into theories at Columbia.
Yeah, I think the first idea that we have of normal school, that actually in Colombia, I didn't put the full name because the full name in Colombia is Superior Normal Schools. It's not only normal schools. And superior because in Colombia, we call universities institutions of superior education. So
And the other ones are just normal.
Just normal.
that there is an idea behind that is like the last stage of the normal schools in Colombia, is that they are becoming, I mean, from the state, they have to follow some kind of requirements that are very aligned to a university. So even though they don't have the conditions of the university, they are asked to complete those requirements. So that's why there was a change in the name. It's not only normal school, but a superior normal school.
Probably needs one more change in the name.
Exactly, yeah.
Ones here, the normal schools, state teachers college, state colleges, now universities.
Yeah, I mean, it's a linguistic game. It's Wittgenstein,
Yeah.
you know? It's the language in context.
Yeah. So there is another term, I don't know if you have heard about that, which is I will try to translate it into English because I have heard in Spanish, which is the universalization of normal schools. That is the process
Right.
of normal schools just to become a university or college.
Is that official or that's underground?
It is underground, but I'm reading one author that is doing a lot of research in that term. So that is the last stage in Colombia. So there is the idea, and she supports the idea that there have been a lot of things going on in terms of just finish the normal schools, that is the last stage. But the point is that in Colombia, especially, there are some schools, superior normal schools, where there are no any other institutions. So they cannot just close it, because then what would be the representation of an educative institution in those specific contexts where the government has not addressed. So there are many things that we need to consider. There are many points of discussion in there. I think there are more questions. Yeah, Dilly said, yes, using our communities as a space for our own learning. Yeah. Thank you for your comment. So I don't know if there are more questions, comments. I think we are approaching to the end. There are 30 seconds left. So this is my email address. And if you want to contact me by WhatsApp, that QR code will lead you to my WhatsApp number, or you can contact me by my email address, Nefe. So thank you very much for being here. I'm glad that you gave me your feedback on all the incomes for my research. Of course, it will be invited to my doctoral dissertation. I'm not sure where it's gonna be that.